Welcome, everyone. We are going to start. I am Lia Shortino. For those who don't know, I am the founder and director of SEA-Junction, and SEA-Junction is this venue focusing on Southeast Asia. And today we are quite honored to have a very good team of speakers who will talk about one issue which has got a lot of attention because it concerns really the entire region. We know that in starting Cambodia, but then more and more also in Laos and Myanmar, there are these new scams place in which people are trafficked to. I think today it's really more about the human side and the trafficking side rather than the crime side, although we do have someone, we will discuss it from a crime perspective. So I think without further ado, we start with Kristina, right? And she's going to give indeed the perspective of the crime. And then we have a journalist who has investigated, Caleb, who has investigated this issue. And I read this article, and that is why I think I invite him here. So that was really the, was inspired by what he wrote. He wrote about rescue. The one I read was particularly about rescue. And then we have Sokchar from Cambodia, who has worked on migration and trafficking for, I don't know, I know him for 20 years, but probably even more than that. And last but not least, we have Amon from IOM, who was supposed to be here in person, but unfortunately she got COVID. So COVID is still going around here in Thailand, and she is one of the victims at the moment, but luckily not too serious. So please, Kristina.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me just try and start my slides. I think that should work. So yeah, my name is Kristina Amerhauser. I'm a program manager at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. And maybe just as a very quick introduction at the beginning about the Global Initiative, we're an international NGO headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And we work on issues related to organized crime and corruption globally. So the GI has three core functions. One is conducting research and analysis on organized crime, so gathering information and analysis on various illicit markets, promoting greater debate and raising awareness on the impact of organized crime on communities around the world. And then thirdly, advancing innovative approaches to building the building blocks to an inclusive global strategy against organized crime. We also have a resilience fund that's a grant-making mechanism to civil society organizations that work in their communities to build resilience to organized crime. And I'm not doing a very good job with the slides because that would have been the first one. So the Global Initiative is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. We now have over 100 staff across the globe working in different observatories in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America that cover sort of regional topics and trends. Our observatory in Asia Pacific was launched in 2019. And last year, exactly a year ago, actually, we opened the office here in Bangkok. It's fascinating how quickly time passes, but it's been a great year so far. So we're mostly focusing on, or we have mostly focused on environmental crime, actually, and illicit financial flows. We've also done quite a lot of research on the role of social media in organized crime, both on how illegal wildlife, for example, is traded online, but also the role that social media plays in recruiting human trafficking and labor exploitation victims. And this is also how we started working on the cyber scam issues. Just before I go sort of right into the details of the cyber scam operations, I wanted to show a couple of numbers and data that we've put together in our organized crime index to sort of set the scene for the Mekong or Southeast Asia. So this is taken from our organized crime index, which was first launched 2 years ago, and assesses criminal markets, criminal actors, and the state's capacity to respond to organized crime for 193 countries across the world. I mean, here I've only pulled out the data for the Mekong, but I think this is really important because it's worth highlighting two things. Organized crime is really pervasive in the Mekong across many criminal markets. So it's not just human trafficking that's an issue, but really there are lots of different types of organized crime that are happening in the Mekong. And another observation is the involvement of state-embedded actors in facilitating and enabling this type of crime. According to the data from the index, state-embedded actors score in many countries as the highest group of criminal actors in various countries. And I think this is also important because it shows that the cyber scam issue didn't just happen overnight, but is really embedded in the broader ecosystem of crime in this region. And so many of the locations where we're seeing that the cyber scams are happening have previously been linked to other types of crimes, such as the illegal wildlife trade or money laundering, etc. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about the cyber scam operations? There's been an increasing account of these cyber scam operations since the beginning of COVID-19 or early 2020, but that doesn't mean that they didn't exist beforehand. It's just that the pandemic actually really created ideal conditions for them to proliferate and to expand across the region. And since then, the scam operations have been changing quite a bit, and they vary from location to location, but there are a couple of common features that I think are worth highlighting. So they usually involve victims being approached online, on social media, through job advertisements and agencies. And these advertisements really seem very legitimate. Some of the victims go through various stages and rounds of job recruitment processes and interview stages until they get to the scam centers. People recruited are then forced to scam other people through fake betting sites, investments in oil, gold, cryptocurrencies, or hybrid relationship scams. In the beginning, we saw lots of victims from across Southeast Asia that speak mostly Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, and English. But especially over the past months, the people that have been trafficked into the scam operations also include people from India, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe. Actually, I think we've now identified victims from all across the globe and every continent except Australia and Antarctica. So it's really very wide. And I think we'll hear more from other speakers also about the victim profile, but just to say that these are often not the classical human trafficking profile victims. So there are many men involved, they're low, but also medium income actually. And maybe another point to make is that there's no shortage of people being recruited in it. Also, given the COVID pandemic and the challenging economic circumstances of the region, more and more people are aware that there are risks involved in some of these jobs, but they are in need of a job. And so there's really quite a risk. And so I think we've also just talked about this. There's this challenge that many of the people recruited into these scam operations are victims themselves and victims of human trafficking. They're tricked into the jobs, held against their will through debt bondage and the threat of torture. And so it's really challenging to distinguish between those that are in there to make money and that are criminals and those that are actually victims of human trafficking. And so just here very quickly on the slides are some of the locations that we've identified so far. You can see it's really become a regional phenomenon. And maybe just also to say that many of the countries aren't traditionally destination countries of human trafficking, but actually much more transit and origin countries. Cambodia has been identified as sort of the first hotspot, but there's been a shift from Cambodia to Myanmar. And more country and many victims also get moved around in Cambodia. Thailand plays a key role, especially as a transit country. But I'm sure Caleb is going to tell us more about this. And many scam operations are linked to special economic zones across the region, and often casinos, hotels, repurposed resorts, and the like. There are more than 128 special economic zones and more than 350 casinos across the region. That's not to say that this is happening in all special economic zones or in all casinos, but just that this is a preferred location. And that's important because SEZs often come along with that notion of lawlessness, that law enforcement are not able to enter because they have special security at these places, they're leased out, etc. And so that really comes together with another set of challenges. And actually, I think many of the things I've already quickly touched upon, but just a couple of more related to recruitment of the victims and how they are entrapped. So the way it works is that the scammers, which were often trafficked into the operations, are forced to conduct the scams, approach people online, and lead and sort of leads are being passed up the chain. They first convince people to make small investments to which they get an immediate return. Then they're asked for a bigger investment. And once they've sort of invested a lot, they lose everything, contact is cut, and they're ghosted. And transactions don't just happen through the formal financial system and banks, but also the trading of shares, applications to buy lottery tickets, cryptocurrencies, of course. And I think especially in the organized crime context, we've always been talking about the role of cryptocurrencies, but it was always there were always a lot of question marks around this, and this has really brought the cryptocurrency topic also back on the top of the agenda. Then who's behind it? Many of the operations are run by criminal networks from Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, but often with links to criminal networks, links to China and Taiwan. It is likely that more criminal networks have now entered the space, given that they've realized how profitable it is, and probably more are still entering. And again, I think it's just really to emphasize that this is a regional phenomenon with interlinkages across countries, and they're relocating victims across these countries. So what are the connections between the criminal networks among them? And so this is my final slide, I promise. Just to wrap up with, I think there's been a lot of interest and attention on the phenomenon, but there's also still really a lot of things that we don't know about it. And so I think a key question is the scale. We're always talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of victims that are being trapped in these compounds, but we simply actually don't know how many they are. All we can say is that it's a lot. The second thing for me is there's little information on money flows associated with it. So what's the scale of the profit, both from the human trafficking enterprises, but also from the scams? They're using cryptocurrencies. How are they converting that into the banking system? Where are the assets actually located? Because we need to go after the money to also identify and take the means practically out of it. More data, we need to gather more data from the victims that we're able to rescue and support afterwards. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Caleb and also IOM about that afterwards. And but maybe just to say that it's not just about collecting data and getting more information, but also really making it accessible to everybody. We've talked before that we're still surprised how many people have not heard about this issue, and it's such a big phenomenon in the region. We need to make sure that we're sharing it with the right information with the right people. There seems to be some momentum on this now, so yeah, lots of challenges, but I think there's also lots of opportunity to do something on this. So maybe we can discuss some of the next steps afterwards.
So thank you very much, Kristina, for this kind of overview of what we are talking about. And now we go more in depth with Caleb Quinley, please.
Thank you, Leah. Kristina, thank you so much for that overview. I think you did a really good job of capturing sort of the scale of the problem. Just to quickly note, it's true we don't really have the numbers, but tens of thousands seems pretty accurate. Potentially hundreds of thousands, and people are involved in these scam centers, and these are crazy numbers. Tens of thousands, potentially 100,000. Like this is quite baffling. This is quite shocking stuff. And the reality is that a lot of people that we speak to aren't even aware that this is happening across the region. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But just to talk a little bit more about the scope and the scale. So like as Kristina was saying, this has been happening pretty much since after COVID. The scam centers it's not a new thing. It's been around for years, but as she was saying, it really kicked off during the pandemic. And since August last year, there actually has been a bit of a police response, particularly in Cambodia. So Cambodian law enforcement have been attempting to crack down to a degree. So, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the police response, but since August, we have seen waves of crackdowns, waves of raids happening in these call centers, where there's likely thousands of people there still. As Kristina mentioned, there's a range of different criminal groups working working in this space. The vast majority, I think, propping up these scam centers are Chinese run. I think there's a lot of research on that. But there's a lot of groups from Indonesia. There's a lot of groups from Thailand that are moving in, just because there's so much money to be made. So basically there's the expansion is incredibly concerning, and local law enforcement are trying to tap into it, but it's a huge challenge for them. I want to talk a bit about the actual criminals who are involved. So as you were saying, it's mostly Chinese run, but a lot of smaller scale groups are basically tapping in at the especially economic zones. I actually spent about a week embedding with a small group of Thai career criminals in Phoi Phet at the end of the year, who basically dropped everything that they were doing in Bangkok to go move into this economic bracket. And they opened up online casinos with a small amount of money, and they were able to basically make millions of dollars in a very short amount of time. And they did this with very small money, a very small amount of cash flow. So it's not just Chinese cartels. There's Thai groups moving in, Vietnamese groups moving in as well. It's a lot more complicated than just Chinese cartels moving in. Law enforcement across the region are struggling to keep up with the problem as well. From the Thai side, that's my experience. I've spoken to the Department of Special Investigation, which is basically Thailand's FBI, and they're tuned in and they're working on this problem. But they've told me that they're struggling to actually respond to it effectively, just because the numbers are so significant that the amount of cases that they're getting on a regular basis is incredibly difficult to respond to. There are rescues going on. You know, you have certain organizations that are actually going across into Cambodia, going across into Myanmar, and physically pulling people back in like over the border and out of these call centers, because it's really complicated on how you get these people out. Once they're trafficked and once they're brought in, you know, there's basically one of two ways that they can leave. One, they have to pay thousands of dollars in ransom. Or two, they have to either escape themselves or work closely with NGOs or local law enforcement, undercover law enforcement to actually pull them out. And this is incredibly complicated. And it's a problem exacerbated by the reality that the Cambodian law enforcement, the Cambodian government are not really willing to play ball, according to the sources that I've spoken to, and that there's a lot of resistance with Thai authorities, Indonesian authorities, Vietnamese authorities trying to get their victims out, because in the Cambodia context, the local law enforcement there are either involved or they're not interested in coordinating with regional law enforcement. So one message that they really alluded to me is that there needs to be like a regional response from all the different governments, and there needs all the regional authorities need to basically step up and do a bit more. Let me talk a little bit about the victims. Kristina already has kind of given a brief overview. When we think of human trafficking, we think of very low income people, either in the fishing industry or other sectors. With this context, it's a little more complex. In order to pull off these scams, you need to be reasonably educated. You need to have high EQ. You need to know how to like lead someone on for a long period of time. In order to get the huge stakes, thousands of dollars to rip someone off for $1,000, you need to build relationships with these people. And the cartels are aware of this. So they're recruiting people who are highly educated, often university educated. I've spoken to victims who, you know, have master's degrees and they still got duped into working into this. So the profile is very different from what we're accustomed to when we're looking at human trafficking. So and again, it's like, even if you're highly educated, it's the sophistication of the advertisements are quite adept. So a lot of people are still falling into this regardless of education, which is a huge problem. So over the last 2 years, you know, local media, international media has reported on a stream of testimony of victims experiencing torture, human rights violations, ill treatment, like a range of different issues happening inside these scam centers. If they decide that they want to leave, that's not really an option, you know. There was one girl that I spoke to that really stuck with me at the end of last year. Her case still kind of haunts me to this day. She was in her early 20s. She had two young kids. And she was struggling for money, and so she got on Facebook and then saw this ad that, you know, a really well polished advertisement, basically guaranteeing thousands of dollars a month if she moved to the Philippines and took up a call center job. So she did this, and within 2 days she was flown to Manila, all expenses paid. And she said that as soon as she landed at the airport, she was basically shoved into a van with a few other Thais, brought to these huge compounds where there was armed guards. And she said there was around 3,000 people in this compound. And within hours of arriving at the compound, she was told to basically study a script and learn how to scam people her age from Singapore. And so she did this for about 2 days. And she decided that she wasn't interested in doing this anymore. She knew it was illegal pretty much immediately, but felt the threat, you know, immediately as she went in. She saw people with guns. She heard whispers that people were being abused. So within about 48 hours, she asked to leave. As we know, it's not that simple. And so the Chinese this specific scam center was Chinese led. And they basically took her to a small room, kept her in the small room for about 3 days, didn't give her food, didn't give her water. And she said the only reason how she survived is she drank from a faucet for 3 days. Then within 2 more days of her being in this space, other people started getting brought in. And there was about 8 people in the small room who were basically isolated from the rest of the office. So the rest of the people couldn't identify that people were basically rebelling. And they were told, look, the only way you can leave is if you pay $3,000 to $10,000. And so they were able to tell from who they were talking to, their backgrounds on how much money the ransom would go for. For her, it was about $9,000. So she spent the next 48 hours, no food, very little water. She was assaulted, and all of her peers around her were tortured, either with tasers, physically beaten. They were all handcuffed together. And they all had to pay tens of thousands of dollars to leave. And so that's one of the only ways that these victims can even get out of these types of scenarios. Why this particular case stuck with me is that she's still dealing with the consequences today. Before she left, the cartel basically told her, look, like if you go back to Thailand and you go to local law enforcement and you say, look, this is what happened to me, we're going to come to your house. We know where you live. We have people in Thailand who can go after you. And apparently they tell this to everybody, you know, and the reality is it's true. It's like, you know, we know that the criminal groups are in Thailand. They're also based here. So when victims get out of that context, they still have to deal with that trauma, you know, for months or years afterwards. And she still says, you know, I had a conversation with her a few months ago, and she told me that she still looks over her shoulder. You know, she still is always having to consider this. And this is just like one case, you know, again, like we're talking tens of thousands, potentially over 100,000 cases here. We know that it's a Mekong problem, but we're hearing that now there's new reports that the cartels are pivoting to the Middle East. There's been new reports out of Dubai as well. There's actually been a couple of new ones. There's a new report from Vice that dug in quite deep and showed that the extent is pretty significant in Dubai as well. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I probably won't get into at this moment. But yeah, it's an incredibly complex problem, and there's so many different actors that are working on this. And the problem is that it's expanding. It's just continuing to expand. From everyone I've spoken to who's working on this issue, they've basically just admitted that like it's incredibly difficult to combat this because the expansion is happening. And it's possible that tens of thousands could be low for all we know. So these kinds of events are important because awareness is one way that we can have an impact immediately, right? Like the reality is that if the more people are aware of this problem, the more the more people that are aware that scamming is on the rise and that people are getting trafficked in this context, the more they'll be able to defend themselves from this happening to them. If they're approached online and a person tries to bring them in, then they'll be able to respond to this more effectively. And so that's why I think panels like this are really important. And again, I just want to thank the organizers for having us. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for sharing the real stories of victims, and I am sure in the question and answer we can also share more, including on the rescue operation and other aspects of that you have experienced. But now we go to Cambodia. We have heard some comments about the Cambodian government, but let's see what Sokchar will tell us. I know you have done some research also on this topic, and if you want to share the PowerPoint, please do.
Can you see my PowerPoint? Okay.
Excuse me, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Can you try again, please?
I can hear you from
Yes.
here, but I think the one in the room maybe cannot hear, but I can hear Sokchar very well. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I think
Yes.
it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and thank all the organizer that provide me a space to speak today. So my name is Sokchar. I am the director of the legal support for children and women, and also a lawyer in Cambodia. So it's really interesting to listen to the two speaker on the overview of the situation of the forced labor and trafficking among the worker in the scam industry, and I think that is very important. And as you mentioned earlier, I think Cambodia become the hotspot of this crime. I think in early 2022, especially during that time, most of the people who are working in Cambodia are stranded because of COVID-19, and that's why. And also at the same time, it's also the crackdown on the online game, and then this industry become booming. I think this is something that we found. So for those who did not know my NGO, I think Lee is also introduced my NGO. So our NGO is called Legal Support for Children and Women. We found in the year 2002. We have only one office in Cambodia. Our vision is to ensure that all the people are living with dignity. Our mission is to take the right and benefit of Cambodian migrant workers. So our current intervention, we focus on the empowerment of the community. Especially the people, the community of the South province in Cambodia that they plan to migrate. We also provide the legal protection and the legal aid and legal representation to the victim of human trafficking, and also to the migrant worker. And lastly, also do policy engagement and policy advocacy. Uh, look back to the situation of the scam in Quinley, as mentioned by Leah, we conduct the research in the last year, I think during in September, and we just conclude our research at now. We want to better understanding the situation at the ground, because most of the NGOs in Cambodia are only focused with the victim, with the Cambodian victim who was trafficked, who was forced to work abroad. But it's become new to Cambodian, and also not only the NGO, but also to the government of Cambodian, that mostly we are only focused on our citizens to go abroad, but this time it's happened to Cambodian. And as Kristina mentioned, I think the crime is not simple, it's really complicated, and sometimes it's already hard for us to differentiate among the workers who are the victim, or who are the victim of forced labor and human trafficking in the scam, and who are volunteering to work in the scam industry in order to benefit for the financial benefit. I think this is something that challenging most of the government, that it's hard for them to identify, you know, who is the real victim, who is the willing to do. So, like you say, in Cambodia, it's become alerting because the national and the local media reported about the cases. I think, and now I think the industry is also moved from Cambodia to elsewhere to Myanmar. I think one of the things. What is, I think it's not what is the strength to us, what is surprising to us. I think most of the profile of the victim, I think based on our case review, mostly are higher education. They complete the university, but at least they complete the high school. They have some skill. They know how to speak English. I think except the victim from China, but the victim from Thailand, the victim from Indonesia, the victim from Vietnam, who we provide assistance, they also can speak English, and they also have knowledge of IT. Mostly, they got the job through the online advertisement. You know, mostly what they are looking for is the IT, IT people, the translation, the human resource, and the financial analysis. This is all the high skill job that they need on the online. Most of them, when they arrive to Cambodia, they just by plane, by sea, or by land. This is the way they do. I think mostly they can come to Cambodia by this way. Looking the situation at the compound, I think all of you are already mentioned about that, but we try to better understanding. So based on the research, we found that most of the victims that we interviewed, or most of the case file that we review, we found that they arrive Cambodia only with tourist visa. They do not have any employment contract at when they do not have any work permit. They just arrive here only a tourist visa. They do not have nothing with them. So upon the arrival to the compound, I think some they have the staff to pick up. We have one case from Thailand. The staff of the compound picked up her at the Poipet border and then brought her to Sihanoukville from one area to another area. So, and then all the documentation were confiscated. They did not provide the document. The manager already confiscated the documentation. We provide assistance to the group of Burmese group or Myanmar group in another area at the border area. So they was transferred to Cambodian during the pandemic time. I don't know how they entered to Cambodian, and they was locked in the compound in the Cambodian and Vietnamese border, and they forced those the foreigners to do the scam. They target those foreigners. If you cannot scam for $80 per day, the manager will not provide you a food. The manager will not allow you to drink the water. Then you need to drink the toilet water. This is something that the case that we provide assistance. They was forced to scam the people, and I think first we have two ways. I think one thing that we found in the situation, some foreigner, they was forced them to scam, but they did not torture them. They just showed them that if you did not force, if you did not scam anyone, you cannot find the money, I will not give you the documentation, I will not allow you to return back to your home country. In some cases that we found, some foreigner also experience torture or physical violence by the manager of the compound or by the team leader. This is something that we also found. That bondage and weight hair, I think this is another problem that we already had highlighted one question. Mostly, some of the foreigners who travel to Cambodia also paid by the company. And then when they arrive Cambodian, the company said that, oh, you are in debt with the company. Or some victims, they said that, I will not pay you the full salary, I just only pay you the half salary. The recent case that we provide assistance to one Indonesian girl, I think we just returned her back just this month. So she was recruited by the Indonesian agency in Jakarta and then transfer her to work in with the Chinese employer in Phnom Penh, and after they have transferred her to work with another Chinese employer in Babat, the Cambodian border. So she did not pay. She just only, the employer gave her only some amount of the money, but by the end of the day, when the government cracked down on the scam call center industry, her employer kicked her out from the workplace and she had no place to go. She's trained in Cambodia for almost 10 months. And then we are, what we can see, we are unsuccessfully to claim the visa exemption for her. That's why we really need to pay her for the overstay in Cambodia. I think this is another story that we learned. And also abuse and working condition, I think it's more on, most of them work more than 10 hours or 12 hours or 16 hours. They already report that. So, and food sometimes is not really enough. So talking about the group of Burmese that I provide assistance to help. So it's really challenging. They do not have enough food to eat. They just only provide the one-time meal for them to eat. And then water, if they could not earn the money targeted by the manager, then they would be subject to be not to provide food for them or water for them. Yeah. I think when we talk about route up or issue, I think that's really important. Was our speakers is already mentioned about route up and issue. I think mostly the route up and issue never done by the trafficking police. Mostly they do by the immigration police or by the cybercrime unit. We call this linked to the cybercrime crime. That's why, you know, those people, they do not have any sense of the trafficking. Mostly they focus on the crime committed by the worker. So in reality, they will know that, oh, the worker do not have the document to stay, the worker commit a fraud, online fraud, to fraud anyone by online, they become the criminal. I think this is really challenging. And mostly when they reach you and they run up, they just keep them in the immigration center. The facility is not really hygiene. The facility, the capacity of the immigration center is not really enough for thousands of the foreigners who was found out of restrictions. This is another problem. Support, as I mentioned, I think the support is really important, but mostly when we interview the people who return back, they say that there is less support. If you do not have money to pay for some necessary support, or the embassy did not provide you any necessary support, you did not have nothing to support. Psychosocial support is also another problem that we found. Mostly the people who were round up or issues, they also have a trauma before under the restriction of the employer, under the restriction of the manager or the compound. They are really scared, they feel this fear. So, but however, during the interviewing process, there is no NGO involved, only done by the police. And mostly, you know, when the police conduct the interview or conduct the screening with the victim, mostly the way they treat them as the criminal, not the survivor. So the language they use is softened to them, and the communication between them and the victim sometimes is understand, sometimes not understand because of the miscommunication. And then it's something that is correct. The victim could share information more, and what they want to do is just to return back. Lack of support and return of radiation. I think most of the case we found that the victim do not have the capacity to return by their own, so they need to extend it in Cambodia if they do not have money to pay for the overstay or to pay for the air ticket back to Cambodia. In one case, the Indonesian girl that I had, I think since October 2010, 2022, she just returned in May 2023. It's almost 7 months that she's trained in Cambodia. And this is because she did not have money to pay, that's why, and we are not able to get the overstay exemption from the government, and the embassy cannot do more than what we can do, just to refunding and to pay the overstay for her, and then pay her the air ticket back to Cambodia. Another problem that we found, and I think this is something that we really need to discuss more, is about the fine of prosecution for the legal activity. I think this is the criminalize, the victim that they commit the crime under the condition or threatened or due by the other people. Mostly, this is the problem right now, I think. For example, most of the victims overstay in Cambodia or in the other country. It is not their intention, but because their documents were confiscated, because they keep them in the compound where you cannot go out. They cannot find the way to escape. Then those people become the victim. They become the perpetrator of overstay, or in some case there is also the prosecution of those people because they think that this is involved with the other crime. That's what we call false criminality. I think this is something that also very important. So some of the recommendation that I think, like Kristina said, the crime is really go around right now. Is go around in the Mekong country, and I do believe after the Mekong country is, but it's also across the Asian region. Right now, we found that the people from ASEAN, from China, from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from African, and also the other countries was trapped to work in the compound industry in Cambodia and also to Myanmar and Laos. So I think there is a need of coordination among the Asian government to work together and to ensure that the victim are not punished under the crime of overstay or any crime that was to commit by the other people. This is really important. Second thing is improve victim and witness protection. That's really important because if the ASEAN government or also Cambodian government did not improve the victim protection like today, it will be challenging for the victim to seek the justice or to seek the remedy in Cambodia. So it's really important, to grant the right to stay and work for the victim if they want to stay and they want to work. Then they can grant more money to it and by their own. I think certainly is also ensure potential victim right to assess remedy is really important. If the investigation has been conducted properly, and then identify them as the victim, then they can participate in the court process or in the judicial process that they can claim with the compensation, the loss that they encounter through the scam system. Lastly, I think a lot of allocate more resources to support the victim, especially consular support. I think this is really important because based on the case we work, if the victim do not have any resource, it will be challenging for the embassy to help them. So the government of ASEAN should consider more how to allocate more funds to support the consular to do more work for the victim. public complaint, I think already raised by our first speaker, is really important because the crime right now is more around in Mekong and also ASEAN country. There is a need of the public complaint raising awareness public among the country of origin of the victim and also the country of destination. We need to develop a common message to inform our public that this is not the crime is really spread and then we will prevent them. Cooperation is really important between law enforcement to conduct the in-depth investigation. Currently, we challenge that law enforcement in Cambodia, law enforcement in destination country, in the origin country, after the roundup, the victim return back, there is no more cooperation to investigate the network of the crime, the criminal network. So that's why they can do it peacefully. That's something we really need to do. How the network, the organized crime network in Thailand can be engaged with the scam compound in Cambodia and can be engaged with the scam with the Chinese criminal in Cambodia. This is something that more investigation need to be done, cross-border cooperation need to be done. Training is really important. That mostly victim identification, victim-centered approach, and informed interview very important. Most of the law enforcement they need to know this. To make sure that the victim are properly interviewed, the victim will not get more harm through the interview process. And increased coordination between cybercrime unit, bodyguard, I think, as this crime is really involved, not only for the immigration, but also to border guard and also the cyber unit that will be involved. This is their real need, the cooperation among those. You need to work together and sending higher compound to law enforcement and NGO. I think as NGO start to involve, and not only in Cambodia, but also in the origin country, there is a need for more training to increase their capacity to better understand on the complexity of the crime. Like Kristina said, the crime is new, but it's really complex. They really need to better understand. Yeah, this is only from sharing from my part, but I think what I can tell you, through the new both internal, national and local, national and international new, I think the government of Cambodia also take a serious measure to address the issue. But like I told you, the issue of human trafficking, cross-border crime, cross-organized crime cannot be solved by only one government. We really need a strong coordination to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sokchar, for this very comprehensive presentation from the beginning of how victims get recruited to the very end and what the gaps are in the process. Now we go to Among. Among is from Indonesia, but she's here in Bangkok actually with IOM, and she has had quite some experience with the victims that have been rescued and are in Thailand, particularly from Indonesia and other countries. So please, Among, tell us more about the challenge that you encountered. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ibu, for allowing us and inviting IOM to join these sessions. Please allow me to share my screens. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think the previous panelist has been mentioned about the profile of the victim, some challenge. For in my presentation, I just would like to complement what the previous presenter has been mentioned, and also this is based on direct experience of IOM engaging with the victim of trafficking who referred to IOM, whether through direct contact from the government, I mean Thai government, or from the embassies. So Bong Sokchar has mentioned about the recruitment until the exploitation phase. So indeed, like based on the profile that we collected, based on the screening form and identification form, we understood that the recruitment is often combined also from online, but also in-person recruitment. So some of them being recruited through online, Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, and Instagram, but also there are key actors in the sources countries who also facilitate the recruitment process. And I think one thing that we also noticed from this process, most of the recruitment process is for free, unlike in the labor migrations, let's say for the fishery sectors, in which sometimes the migrant need to pay in advance, or the recruitment agency will say that we will cover for you, but we will need to deduct your salary for the recruitment. But for the bond scamming or for the forced criminality, most of the time, the recruiter will say that everything is for free because it's legal, and then we are covering everything. But at the end of the day, they're aware that they need to repay the recruitment costs and also transportation costs. And all of the transportation arranged and paid by the trafficker. Even I think one of the cases that we received last year, the first cases is actually from the Georgia cases, Georgia National. And based on these cases, we identified and we try to collect all the evidence, and it shows that the company, including the recruitment agencies, actually provided everything, arranging everything since the beginning. Even at that time, actually Thailand still and lockdown, I think at that time still require certificate of entry, but the recruiter is trying to ensure that they are comply with Thai policies regarding the COI, including providing quarantine places, also health insurance, etc. It seems everything were perfect there. So that was the first cases. It was in May 2021 that we received, 2022, but they being recruited since 2021. So yeah, and then also we understood that, of course, I think our colleague Kristina also, and then has been mentioned that there are involvement as well from the law enforcement official even in Thailand as the transiting countries, because based on of the identification form and then screening, it's also mentioned there are unscrupulous agencies who are involved, including to arrange their harboring, their transfer process from one airport to the land border, etc. So there are some information on that. And then if we see the means, there are fraud and deceptions. I think our colleague, my colleague previously has been mentioned about this coercion. It's pretty much clear in these cases. And also for the exploitation purpose, some of them, yes, excessive working hour, salary deduction is also, and then it's also there, and cybercrime of online scamming, scam center involved in the online gambling, but also slavery and slavery-like practices. That's what we found. And even based on the information from the victim, there are also organ removal, sexual exploitation within the companies happening. So this is all of the information that collected. It's based on the individual screening that IOM receive and assess. So the IOM current response, we provide direct assistance, including to coordinate and refer the cases from embassy, consulate, also or to embassy or consulate, but also to the governments, including in transit countries like in Thailand, and also vulnerability and risk assessment and VOT screening to provide tailored assistance. This is especially in Thailand. We do a lot of coordinations with the immigration officers, but also with the Department of Social Development and Human Security to ensure that the screening process for these victims are in place. Capacity building of implementing partners, provision of safe accommodation, also in coordination with our government and non-government partners, and then medical assistance, access to national referral mechanism for basic services, travel assistance, and post-arrival assistance. And we do a lot of the government engagement as well to also to respond to this issue, including in the policy dialogue on the victim identification, especially like Bong Sokchar mentioned. One of them is also the implementation of non-punishment principle. I think that's really important at this stage. So we do a lot of engagement in this, especially when we talk about the return and reintegrations management. So voluntary return should be there, not forced return, for instance, and also provision of information through social media, and also non-application of overstay fines to identify for those who identified as VOTs. In some cases, we have a success story where the government's transit countries able to apply non-punishment principle and also to waive the fine, immigration fine, for the victim of trafficking. Yeah, and the caseload, if we mention maybe hundreds, thousands, yeah, for IOM itself, this is the data that IOM has, this in the Southeast Asia regions, 36% of IOM total VOT cases, which is 815 across 10 countries, Southeast Asian regions, are related to the exploitation in the online scamming center. So it's not only in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos, but also Philippines. Kristina also mentioned Philippines. And just last week, we also received information from the Philippine government regarding the rescue of hundreds of victims of trafficking, including from Thailand, Vietnamese, China, and Indonesia in Philippines. So this is something that's emerging, and then we see the number is keep increase, and also 68% of them are male, and then 32 of them are females. And in terms of the range of the age, yeah, we can see that it's between 18 to 35. And if we see here, top 5 countries of origins based on IOM data is Vietnam, Indonesia, Kenya, Laos, PDR, and India. So even Laos is also a country of origin in this, and even though they are also country of destination. So while the country destination is Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Philippines, and Malaysia. This is based on IOM data. And if we see the breakdown of referral entity, we receive 47% referral is actually from the government entities. So this is including embassies or transit countries government like Thai government or sources countries government, and also and destination, Cambodian government, for instance, and also from the NGO, CSO, family, self-referral, and other. The self-referral, normally they're contacting IOM social media like Facebook and then informing that they need help, and then also inform us that their location, etc. And Thailand is major transit countries. This is based on our data, and we identify that because Thailand is the routes here for transit from where the victim being recruited to Thailand, to Myanmar, Cambodia, or Laos, or when they are trying to escape from Cambodia, Laos, or Myanmar. Normally, most of the time, they are trying to enter Thailand. And if we see for Thailand specifically from their travel document, because I think Bong Songka also mentioned some of the exploitation, the document is being confiscated by the company. But when we investigate further, many of them actually having, we can say, fake visas in Thailand. So it seems like they are staying in Thailand, but they are not in Thailand, but they are in Myanmar or in Laos. So when they are trying to re-enter in Thailand, it will be, and we try to investigate further. We try to collect the data regarding the immigrations, the border crossing and movement. We can see that those persons in the immigration system is still in Thailand, but the fact that they are being smuggled to Myanmar or Laos, yeah, that's the cases. And then in 2022, IOM Thailand is the country mission that has handled the most of the cases of VOT for forced criminality in the region. So yeah, this is the reasons. Case even last week we also received referral 25 Indonesian national who just rescued from Myanmar and now in Thailand, and government of Thailand doing the screening and victim identification for those nationals. And the cases that we receive in Thailand specifically, there are 18 nationalities or countries that's involved, including Indonesia, Myanmar, Kenya, India, Ethiopia, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Uganda, Thailand itself, Philippines, and Malaysia. So again, this is to echoing what Kristina mentioned, that it's not only involving Southeast Asia region, but also across the country. It's a global phenomenon. And the ongoing challenge that we identified in here is like similarly with our colleague before that's mentioned about the access of the protection services, for instance. Access is required to conduct intervention to rescue, identify, and assist victims in special economic zone is extremely challenged. And then with the Myanmar, especially in Myawaddy, for instance, with the current political situation in Myanmar, it's also make more and more difficult and challenging to provide rescue and immediate assistance for those who in need. And then the second challenge that we identified is the limited consular representation in the countries of destination to rely on. This is really one of the challenges that we face. So quite often when the victim reach or their family reaching out to us, and when they do not have any travel document, for instance, for the return process, we need temporary travel document. And to arrange temporary travel document, if they do not have any consular services in the destination or in transit countries, it takes months and months to provide written assistance. So this is one of the issues as well. And then characterization of victims who tend to be exclusively identified and treated as undocumented migrants and or complies in cybercrime without first being screened for vulnerability and trafficking in person. So there are a lot of cases that's being reported to IOM. For instance, the court has been convicted. So in Thailand, for instance, the court has been punished them with the irregular entry to Thailand rather than for trafficking cases. So this also something that show that there are lack of the screening process at the first place. So this is one of the issues. And being classified as irregular migrant, it means also they will not entitle a lot of the protection services for victim of trafficking that's available in Thailand. So this will also, and this is the specific challenge is also related to the limited will and capacity to investigate and combat criminal network, but also endemic corruption. We need to say that because it is proof and clear that there are irregularity of movement that facilitated by both sides, transit countries, or even we can say that all of the countries is also involved, sources, transit, and the destination. And also no centralization database. I think Kristina mentioned about this to monitor the IP trends and cases to provide in order to provide evidence-based response. At the moment, what we have is, yes, IOM have the data, other organization has the data. It's only based on the data that reach out to us. But like we understood that there are thousands maybe of people that still being trapped in the scamming, and then we have not been able to rescue and to do screening and identification to all of them. And also large victim caseload puts significant pressure on existing services in countries of destination, but also transit countries, because limited financial resources for need-based protection support. I can say in Thailand, for instance, Thai government only have 9 shelters for victims of trafficking across the countries. And in TOC province, where victim of trafficking for the pawn scamming mostly exploited in Miyawadi area bordering with the TOC province, there is no shelter services for victim of trafficking in TOC provinces. The only available services in TOC is a shelter for family, children, and the family. So, which is quite a different environment with the shelter for victim of trafficking. And in Bangkok, for instance, we only have in Bangkok metropolitan area, only one in Pathum Thani, which can accommodate male and female. Yet many of the victims are male victims. And in Thailand also, the availability for shelter for male victim is only in Pathum Thani. So this is also something that's challenging in providing direct assistance and services. And also, not only for the shelter, but for the returns. If the embassy doesn't have the resources to provide return support, the family, the victims or their family also doesn't have any means to provide financial resources for return. This also another issue. While in Thailand, although Thai government, they have victim assistance fund that can be assisted by those who identified as victim for the return. However, the process for identifications and also accessing those assistance, the written assistance, may take time, months and months. So that's also another issues. And then limited intra and cross-border cooperation among key frontline officer, I think, and also responder not only to identify, but also to provide emergencies and then immediate support, return and reintegration, access to justice, and also in more general protection services for victims of trafficking. Thailand and Cambodia, we do have the SOP, bilateral SOP on law enforcement cooperation, the SOP on return and reintegration for victims of trafficking. But when the cases hit Thailand and Cambodia at the time, when we found that a lot of Thai nationals also being exploited in pawn scamming industry in Cambodia side, this bilateral cooperation also somehow still not cannot be implemented very well. So that's also another challenge. So this is to show that there are a lot of limitation on intra and but also cross-border cooperation. And what IOM recommend for to address this issue? Of course, we do a 4P solution framework. From the preventions our colleague has been mentioned the need of the awareness raising campaign in country of origin, transit, and destination. Knowledge management is really important to prevent the issues. From centralized information exchange to research, I think it's not only about the root scale, root causes, demographic, but also to have more evidence based on the counter-trafficking programming within the region. And then improve border management for effective detections and identification of VOTs. Because this also can prevent, if we do have clear SOP and also strong border management, I think we can prevent the migrants being trafficked in this industry. Let's say when the consular issuing the visas for the foreigner, there are still a lot of area that need to be improved, how to identify that the request for visa is really for the available job in Thailand, or this is something that's actually trying to manipulate just to only to receive the tourist visa, for instance, and then but at the end of the day will lead into false job or job opportunity, not in Thailand even. And then in terms of the protection, on the victim direct assistance, I think immediate life-saving assistance is still very important to be enhanced, and also return and reintegration. At this stage, I think what we are doing is still limited to provide return, but we forgot about reintegration. While reintegration is also a key when we provide comprehensive protection services, we understood that one of the reasons why they are involved in this job, for instance, is also because of COVID pandemic, where a lot of people losing their job. So reintegrations program is really important. It's not only providing return assistance, but also sustainable reintegration to mitigate that they are become or being re-recruited and become a victim in other countries. And capacity building, national level capacity building to ensure that law enforcement agencies use trauma-informed and victim-centered approach. It's important, and understand how these emerging trends fall under the scope of Palermo Protocol. This is something that we think it's really crucial. For Thailand as the transit countries, quite often we also heard from the frontline officer why we need to provide a direct response while we are in transit countries. The locus of the crime is not happening in Thailand, but happening in Myanmar, in Laos, in Cambodia. However, if we see the Palermo Protocol, all parties actually has the responsibility to provide protection services for victims of trafficking, even for the potential victim of trafficking. And then legal and policy guidance, technical guidance, encouraging anti-trafficking in persons programming related to the legislation policy, but also to recognize and entitle VOTs of tip for the comprehensive protection, including waiving the immigration fine. And then in terms of the prosecution will be capacity building. This is our recommendation. Need to strengthen the national law enforcement agencies to investigate and respond to the linkage between cybercrime and trafficking in person, but also effective and continuous access to justice for victims. This is really important. And at the end of the day, this is my last presentation. It's partnership. Policy dialogues is still needed. Sources, transit, and destination countries. This is not only problem of Cambodia, problem of Thailand, problem of Myanmar, but problem of everyone. So we need to strengthen our partnership and dialogue on this. Also, national referral mechanism and transnational referral mechanism for victims of trafficking. This is really important. We understood that in the ASEAN context, last week, the ASEAN leader has declared that they are committed to combat trafficking, especially those caused by misuse of technology. So we hope that this is a good starting point, and we can draw more comprehensive action point really to tackle these issues, not only from rescue, but rescue providing immediate assistance short-term assistance, long-term assistance into the sustainable reintegration for victims of trafficking, and in parallel also combating the syndicate and transorganized crime who involved in this crime. So yeah, then joint investigation will be our recommendation, or IOM recommendation for all countries. So I will stop here and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Among. Terima kasih banyak. So we are going to open the floor. I think we have had quite a comprehensive view of the issue and the challenge and the gap. We have some questions already online, but first I open the floor here. Please introduce yourself and then ask the question or comment. Okay, first, yes. Second, third, okay.
Hello, my name's Maya. I'm from the Global Alliance Against Trafficking Women. We're an alliance of NGOs that work to protect the rights of migrant women, women working in informal sectors, and trafficking survivors. Sokchar's organization, LSCW, has been a member of ours for many, many years, so it's nice to see him today. We've been following this issue for the last few months and working with our partners in the region to examine the human rights implications in these cases. And one of the things that we're most concerned by is the ways in which overly restrictive and securitized approaches to migration governance are contributing to human rights abuses in these cases. So what I mean is, for example, the widespread use of immigration detention is leading to the detention of trafficking victims. The criminalization of migration is leading to victims being prosecuted for immigration offenses. The lack of labor migration pathways in the region means that when victims are told that they'll be coming in on a tourist visa, that doesn't raise alarm bells because it's very common for workers to have to come in on a tourist visa in order to try and then convert to a work permit. And so my question for the panelists is, in your work, in your conversations with governments in the region, do you think these connections are being made between migration governance policies and the human rights violations in these cases? Or is there something that we can be doing as civil society, as the UN, to make that connection clearer?
Thank you very much, Shamila. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Vanessa. I'm a graduate student at the MATES program at Chulalongkorn University. And I have kind of two questions, but one is related to the one that the previous guest asked. And it's kind of like an expansion on that, on the victim side, mostly on who is vulnerable in this situation, because as we know, the profile of victims in this cybercrime cases are quite different from your typical human trafficking cases, in which we see like very vastly in other like sectors like the fisheries and stuff like that. So I would like to know like who has been identified as vulnerable, and wait 2 seconds. Oh, and in addition would be the visa. Like how would then the people at the border or like officers at the border can be trained to recognize the trend of like potential victim, like in the screening process, in identification process? So that's my first question. My second question is, it is short. It's a yes or no question, I guess. But it's on in Thailand, we have the national referral mechanism, and I would like to understand that within Southeast Asia region, especially in mainland Southeast Asia, is there any policies or any mechanism across the board as ASEAN or within the because there are trafficking and transit and origin countries within the region? Is there any type of mechanisms or like protocols within this region to address specifically this issue? Because it's quite clear that the typical one for other type of trafficking is not working.
Okay, Dewi. Second term.
Thank you. My name is Dewi. I'm from Rapid Asia. From this presentation, I look at this is all about the victim and about the reaction, how to protect and how to help the victim. But interesting about the prevention because before it happened, so because most of them using the online platform, social media and etc. My question is it anything, what can we do to prevent, like for example, before during the election, before election, there is hoax on or the misinformation on the Facebook, and that very bad impact in the election in the US or maybe in many countries. So but then the Facebook the Meta makes like so they will stop if there is some misinformation and hoax or something. So I want to ask, is it anything that we can do to prevent and then to identify the this platform, and then the government can make the policy to stop that, or to how to identify and then prosecute before it happens? Thank you.
Okay, one more question from the online. Actually, there are a lot, but I will choose one. Some trafficking victims have been rescued from Suekoko area. How were they rescued? What is more generally, I mean, how rescue happen in this field? Are you able to operate? And the second, about the fact that many of the victims are in immigration detention center in Thailand, and how long they have to stay there. Well, I will start this time from Among and go the other way around. Yeah, giving a chance to all the panelists to reply. Please be brief so we do a second round.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is really important to interlink the issues with the migration governance. I think there are ongoing discussions on this in the ASEAN regions, including Philippines also has initiated some Manila dialogue, which focus on the cybercrime and trafficking. I think Thai government also will continue to lead the discussion. There are regional meetings that happens and organized or co-chaired by Thailand to specifically discuss about this issue in August this year. So yes, there are, will be my response. That's really important to try to linkage the migration governance with the current trend of TIP, especially in Thailand. Also, there are need to change the policy in the immigration government, including amending the Immigration Act, which is out of date, and also lack of the protections mechanism there. And also, who are the second question, I think, how we determine the vulnerability. Yes, we do determine vulnerable migrants. IOM has the tools on that, but we also share with the Thai government, this one for Thailand especially. And also if that's related to the trafficking in person, then we do the identification based on acts, means, and exploitation indicator to better understand who are the most vulnerable among this group. And if you see my slide also mentioned that not all of the victims that refer to IOM are confirmed as victim of trafficking. I think only 86% of them who are confirmed as victim of trafficking. The rest is non-victim of trafficking. It means they maybe have the involvement in the recruitment process, or they also even having an involvement in the exploitations process while in the compound. So there are, like Bong Soka mentioned, there are very, a need for to enhance the capacity of the frontline officer to better understand trafficking indicators. So that's the crucial part. So all of the frontline officer will be able to identify which one that's vulnerable and considered as victim of trafficking, which one is not, or having an involvement in the recruitment and exploitations phase. And also in the ASEAN, whether there are any broader umbrella for the transnational referral mechanism. Yes, it does. We do have the ASEAN conventions on TIP. They do have the ASEAN plan of action. But the problem is, I think, the implementation of the ASEAN conventions on TIP itself. There are ongoing discussions within the ASEAN countries to try to exercise the potential, or to concretize what are the transnational referral mechanisms should look like. I think there are ongoing conversation on that. But if you see the national referral mechanism, I can say within 10 countries, the national referral mechanism in each ASEAN countries is different. So the way they are identified victim of trafficking, the protection assistance for victims of trafficking, it's different from one country to another. This is also a gap and challenge. That's why when we talk about the transnational referral mechanism, while national referral mechanism itself within the ASEAN countries very diverse depending on their national law. So I think that's one of the challenges that we also need to discuss more and more with the ASEAN, how to ensure that the transnational referral mechanism and national referral mechanism actually in line with the international and regional protocol. And for the prevention, and I think engagement with the private sector, especially Meta, is really crucial. There are ongoing conversation, I think, including a global initiative also has been engaged. RSO Bali process also trying to engage with the Meta to discuss about this. So there are ongoing conversation, and absolutely it is important to bring them on board because all of the recruitment process is through social media, which is there are need of critical involvement from the private sector service provider to be aware on what is trafficking and how they can prevent, work collaboratively with us on this. And then how the rescue happens. Yeah, so because IOM doesn't have a mandate on the rescue, but we normally receive the cases when the rescue has been happened. So we being informed that the embassy normally for the embassy, they're dealing directly negotiation with the company or negotiation with the Myanmar government to provide rescue process to, yeah. So, but IOM role will be upon or post-rescue process. So, and immigration detention center, how long they should stay? It's challenging question. Yeah, that's why critical screening and identification process will be crucial in this, because in Thailand, I just want to speak in Thailand context. Thailand, they have the NRM, National Referral Mechanism on Victim Screening, Identification, and Referral for Victims of Trafficking. And under the NRM operational guideline, it's clearly stated that those people, regardless of their migration status in Thailand, if they are identified as victims of trafficking, they should not be charged for the irregular entry or irregular stay in Thailand. So that's why screening and identification process is really crucial. So to avoid the detention, but unlikely, unfortunately, yeah, not many of the frontline officers are fully aware on the NRM operational guidelines. So we still see a lot of the victim of trafficking or potential victim of trafficking actually being detained in Thailand Immigration Detention Center.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Sokchar, please also brief.
I think Aman is cover all the question, but I think two things that I want to bring into the consideration. One thing is about the policy. I think mostly ASEAN government, not all ASEAN government, they consider security reason rather than right protection reason. That's why most of the policy, government policy, or also trafficking policy, they prefer to protect the security of the nation rather than to protect the people. I think this is one of the things that we really need to bring more discussion, bring more engagement with the ASEAN government. Second thing, for the trans-border referral mechanism, like Amon said, every national referral system they have, but to combine trans-national, I think it's a big challenge. Mostly, I can share one example. In Cambodia, they did not recognize foreigner as the victim of human trafficking forced labor. But when they come back to Indonesia, the Indonesian government and the Indonesian or the Malaysian, they said, oh, this is the victim of trafficking based on the law, based on the Palermo Protocol. So this is the lack of common understanding, lack of the common agreement among the ASEAN government on the victim identification. I think this is really important that need to be done. We have all the ASEAN government ratify the Palermo Protocol. ASEAN government, they have their own TIP convention and also the other instrument that they need to discuss together. And I think one example, when we interview our victim from Thailand, that mostly Thailand consider this is the undocumented migrant worker overstay in Thailand. But when they return back to Thailand, we use the same tool provided by IOM, the same tool with the national screening form. We found that they are the victim of human trafficking. So I think this is a big discussion when the government of ASEAN, they try to shout to each other, but they did not come up with the common understanding, common agreement on the victim identification. I think those are the two things that we really need to bring to the consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Khaled?
Yeah, I think the last two panelists did a pretty good job of examining the policy changes that need to happen. I'm happy to talk a bit more about how the rescues work. In Shwe Koko, I think the final question, I don't have the specifics of how that rescue went down, but for about a year and a half, there's been a small handful of Thai-based NGOs that have been carrying out rather dramatic rescues. And essentially how they work is they intercept vehicles between one town to another town while victims are being sold. So at any given moment, you know, you have victims who have been sold for a year plus or just a small window of weeks, and then they get sold from one cartel to another cartel. And so generally how these NGOs operate is they communicate with the victims themselves online, and the victims will pinpoint locations en route. And so these small handful of organizations that have people who have military background, police background, who are involved in these groups are actually going in vans, and when they're stopping to get gas on the road, they'll pull in and physically pull out victims from the cars, from their vehicles. Often it's entire busloads of people. So one group that I spent weeks with, they're called the Emmanuel Foundation, and they speak openly about these rescues. In less than a year, they rescued over 700 people in this specific fashion. And this is just one group that's doing this. You know, a lot of these NGOs that are conducting these rescues, you know, it's very, very machismo. It's like rather dangerous. You know, you have to have some type of background security to be able to accomplish this. So there's only a small contingent of groups that are really doing this. But it's in this context where, you know, there's only two ways you really can get out of these call centers. Is either you have thousands of dollars you can cough up and then, you know, to the cartels, and they'll allow you to go, or you have to get desperate and you have to utilize these groups, and it's working, you know. And there's an argument for like maybe it's not safe and they're putting the victims at risk, and that's valid. But at the same time, you know, it has been proven to be an effective way to actually rescue these victims without having to go through the entire bureaucratic process of going through immigration and providing ransom and then getting the government officials involved. A lot of these groups, when they conduct these rescues, they're not communicating with the Cambodian authorities at all. They're just going in completely rogue, because they know if they attempt to utilize the Cambodian authorities, and again, I keep talking about the Cambodia context here because this is kind of my area. They don't get any assistance at all, and they've been very blunt with me in saying that, look, like if we go that route, that's probably the right way to go about it, but they know they're gonna bump into you know, an intense amount of resistance, and that it's just not a feasible way to rescue victims. So I imagine at Shwe Koko, that's probably how the rescue went down. But yeah, that's pretty much gives you a quick picture of how these are working.
Yeah, just maybe another comment on the prevention question, especially with social media. I think there's a big need to increase partnerships with the private sector. One of them is social media. So there's actually been quite a lot of work done around analyzing how the job posts work. They often use similar language. They, for example, promise a relatively high salary for the region, and they offer others things like accommodation or free food, or even so there are certain patterns that are repeated on social media platforms, and there are a number of civil society organizations already working with Meta to take these down, to flag them, and to put up warning signs that if you are interested in a job, well, you should consider this and this, and please be aware. So there's quite a lot of this work already being done. That said, that's, as far as I know, only being done with Meta, so Facebook. But there's so many other social media platforms that are also being used. Salo in Vietnam, WeChat, there's so many. And there's much less engagement with these social media platforms. So I think there's a really big need to continue the conversation with Meta, but also try and create partnership with others. And then there's the whole point that this is social media companies, but we're also talking about building partnerships with financial institutions. We need to talk to banks. We need to be able to follow the money, not just banks, but also mobile money companies or fast money transfer companies. Then there's the role of utility providers. They're all using internet, for example, and I think there's a need to build partnership with those. So the private sector is much larger than just social media, but they definitely have a big role to play, and they are also enablers and facilitators. So we should be talking much more with them when talking about solutions. Maybe the last thing is also in building more partnerships with civil society and among civil society organizations, actually, because there are quite a lot of organizations working on different things, doing research, raising awareness, rescuing victims. We have sometimes a very siloed approach to it. We're working in Cambodia, we're working in Myanmar, we're working in Laos. Some of us know each other, but not everybody actually. So I think there would be a real benefit to bring the knowledge together, to create a platform, to engage more, to really combine our resources to work together to tackle the problem.
Yes, so we do a second round. I saw already there was a question and then here, okay.
Hi, I'm Nadia Panzani. So originally from South America, you make reference several times about the situation in Latin America. Half French also, living in Thailand. I'm not expert in human traffic, but I'm a human rights defender and I work a lot with civil society organizations. Back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in Latin America, when the cartels become a big issue, it was a lot of strategies on law enforcement, especially financed by USAID in the region because of the security problem for them, right? This didn't work. The specialists know that, right? At all. What actually works at the end was more than law enforcement with a state level, that is important actually. It was the lack of prevention system. And for example, in Central America, I was part of the initiative of create these early warning systems of human traffic to prevent the victims to end up in these networks. But that means a lot of work with civil society organizations at the community level. And that means a lot of research also for them and training. So it's this sharing knowledge. My question is, there is any initiative like this in the region? Because we know we have the data, we know the areas, we know the scan of the victims. There is any kind of initiative at this moment like this, at least a first one? This is my only question. And second is a comment talking about social media. TikTok, for example, in general, not only on human traffic, but also in sexual abuse for minors, is a big issue. And yes, social media is something that everyone at all the levels, we need to see it and work with that. Thank you.
Jan?
Hi, my name is Yam, and I'm a photojournalist. My question is about we talking about mafia or different kind of mafia. You mentioned that small groups, but also big groups. How dangerous is to research on the field? There are heavily armed groups. Do we know the name of this mafia? I mean, there is a name, triads, or I don't know. I'm trying to understand how dangerous is to research on the field about this topic, and if we have any idea of who they are. We say that they are Chinese or Taiwanese. Do we know who they are, or it's just a mystery? Or thanks.
Thank you. Maybe another question. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Patricia. I'm a reporter for Southeast Asia for The Asset, covering mostly socio-economic and fintech issues. I wanted to ask also on the perpetrator side. The panelists did mention that a lot of them are in China and in Taiwan, although there are some local cells also. Sorry. My question is, has there been any efforts from governments and regulators top down to actually find out who these people are, to freeze assets, to recover assets, to, like what you said earlier, how to trace the money? Yeah, that's all.
There is a last question from the online is about, I mean, maybe a naive question in terms in Cambodia and other places should be quite visible, these cyber scam places. So what role have the authority in to let it still continue? I mean, they are visible, so why no one? Now we know in some border areas it's not possible really for the state to intervene, but in other places may be possible to intervene, so why not? These are the questions, and then we conclude. So please, who want to start now? Kristina?
Sure. A couple of things. So I think I completely agree with you. Civil society has a huge role to play in tackling organized crime more broadly, but also with the cyber scam operations. I think in the Mekong and in Southeast Asia, the space for civil society has been shrinking over the last couple of years. So it's really quite challenging for them to work on a number of different topics, including the cyber scams. There are reports from Cambodia of those that have been supporting victims initially, etc. So there, despite the limited space, though, there are really a lot of civil society organizations working on this issue. Maybe not as coherently and networked as we would hope, but I think there's quite a lot of effort being done by different civil society organizations to do exactly this. And we and others are working to bring civil society to actors together to exchange information on this. The Bali Process Regional Support Office is doing similar initiatives. So I think there is some push and momentum actually going on, especially in the cyber scam stuff. How dangerous is it to research? I would say quite dangerous. It is extremely challenging to do so. Do we know the names? And yes, there has been amazing research already been done where people have identified some of the people that are involved in this. But I don't think that the information has been made public or is being made public in very specialized cases. I think we're gathering more information, we're getting better at understanding who's behind this, but there is still much more work to do on this. And again, it goes back to this very challenging situation for civil society and the media to do these things. Cambodia has shut down news outlets that have been speaking out on different issues. So it's not easy to report on this, neither in English nor in the local languages. So yeah, I'll hand over to the others.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's varying levels of threat depending on, how involved you get reporting on this stuff. If you're going into Ploipet, SEVs, Shui Coco, and you're reporting this stuff from the ground, I think that heightens the risk that you face. But if you're doing research remotely and you're sort of like off the beaten path, if you will, I think that decreases the odds of you running into trouble yourself. But the people who are in at the NGOs who are working to actually rescue people who are working on the ground on a daily basis, like those are the ones who are actually putting their lives on their line. You know what I mean? Like journalists like myself, like it's easy for us to cover the story remotely and then pop in and do interviews and leave, but I don't think it's incredibly dangerous for us to be, I think, covering this stuff. People like Emmanuel Foundation who are doing these rescues, like they're the ones who are happy to walk into danger to rescue people. So I think the problem is significant enough for them to kind of counter to make that calculated risk, and they go in and do that. But I think generally there's risk. There's always risk. I think if you report on this kind of stuff or you do this kind of research, but it's not super high. But that's just my opinion. I think it depends on who you ask.
Yes, Among.
Yeah, in terms of CSO, indeed there are ongoing initiative on this. I think I can mention in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and also Thailand and Cambodia. There are civil society organizations who do a lot of the community awareness raisings, also informing about this new trend of trafficking, and not only providing the information on trafficking, but also the available services if they are trapped in this situation. So just to let you know, like last week also IOM organized a meeting with the affected embassies, like 18 embassies. So we agree that there are a need to develop more information material, not only for the migrant or for the victim, but also for the consular officer itself. So they know how to contact if they are citizen actually reporting them the cases to them, and then how to make an initial contact and how to do the rescue, etc. So I think that's really important. So yes, working for the civil society organization at the community level, but also at the same time building the capacity of the frontline officer, including consular services. And investigation, I also need to mention this one. I think there are ongoing investigations. Some of investigation is happening in Indonesia, in Thailand also. We understand from both government, they are doing some investigations, ongoing investigation to crack down the syndicates. But I think the challenge at the moment is really to have like comprehensive investigation from the sources countries to the destination, and to find who are the mastermind behind this. Like you said, that seizing the assets of those who get the most benefit from this operation. I think that's still the challenge, but there are some initiative, ongoing investigation for the crime. Yeah, that's and lastly, like we all aware that know that it is easy. It seems easy to crack down this, but I think, like I mentioned in one of my slides, corruption is also an issue. It's not easy because there are a lot of dynamic dimensions that also interface in this. One thing is, yes, access to protections, yes, law enforcement process, but also political and economic issues that linkage in this crime, and also, yeah, who's take the benefit from this operation. I think that's also, I want to say that that's why make it more difficult to comprehensively tackle this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So no more last minute question. Then we can conclude. An applause for our speakers. Applause. Yes, thank you. And then I want to announce the next event of SEA-Junction on the 20th. We have a very moving exhibition of drawings from insane prison, the most infamous prison in Myanmar, by a prisoner who was there for 6 months. And there are more than 70 drawings about the condition inside the prison, as well as the people who were arrested, mainly political prisoner, but also this is after the coup, but also a so-called normal, just people who were cut by mistake or whatever reason was there. And then on the 2nd of June, my own book, a little bit of public relation, is about social protection during COVID. What was the social protection of COVID-19 response in 6 countries of Southeast Asia? So Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, and I forget the 6th, but in this moment, but there are 6 of them. So it's been a regional research, and finally the book will come out. I believe is still extremely relevant because it showed that social protection system did not work very well during COVID and needs to be improved. And the book try to say what needs to be improved. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned about what to do now that COVID is somewhat lesser, although we have someone who is with COVID at the moment, but it's lesser than before. It's time to think also about the social welfare and the gaps that were highlighted during COVID. So this is the next 2 programs for SEA-Junction. So please come and continue to follow us, and on your way out, give a donation, because that help us to continue to do this interesting, I believe, program. Thanks again to the speaker, and see you to the next event. And also, I forget, there is some coffee and tea and small snacks outside to continue the discussion. Thank you.